Be Your Best You, the Passionate to Purpose podcast with David Delaney. Good morning and thank you for joining us this morning. You're very, very welcome to this episode of Be Your Best You. This morning we talk about mental health. A lot of you will know Christy Bannon, my guest this morning, from his work on stage with the pantomime group in Portlaois, where he would have played a lot of characters over the years and entertained audiences. This morning, Christy talks to us in depth and very openly about mental health and his journey over the last number of years. And we're very, very grateful to Christy for joining us and speaking with us. Just to let you know, there may be some triggers in the conversation, and we have included some links to supports that are available to you in the bio of the podcast. So please do, if you are listening and you feel you need to reach out, just visit the bio section where you'll see those links. So this morning, Christy Bannon from Portlaois talks to us about mental health. Christy, good morning, and thanks for joining us here this morning.
Thank you, David. Nice to be chatting to you.
No problem at all. Christy Bannon. Christy, you are probably more known in Portlaois for your theatre work, and people will know you through the years, gracing the stage in many guises on panto. Very. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Christy. Tell us the background.
Well, I'm 46 years old this August coming. I'm married with 3 children. I'm a prison officer, although I'm out of work injured at the moment. I'm born and reared in Portlaois. My family would have always been, and my extended family would have been known for being members of the amateur dramatic societies, the District Arts Society, going back through the years, and the pantomime group. And I suppose I had been one of the characters in the panto then for the last, there was no show this year. The year before, I couldn't do a show, but for 21 years previous to that, in a row, I had played one of the parts on stage, and I loved it.
Yeah. And where did that come from, Christy? Like, did you see that growing up and say, I want to do this? Or was it a natural progression for you?
Yeah,
or
it was kind of a natural progression. Like, I didn't even realize at the time, I didn't realize until years afterwards, but the first panto in town was in 1954. And it was Dick Whittington and his cat. And the title role was played by my grandaunt, Julia Dooley. And then the dame was my grandfather, Henry Bannon. Yeah. And other cousins then were on stage as well. And that kind of progressed. My father would have been in the shows. He was supposedly a wonderful baritone that didn't matter where you were, you got your note from him. And my parents met backstage in Roscrea in 1972, when they were doing Viva Mexico with Roscrea Musical Society. And I suppose I was 8.5 when the first panto of the current panto group started. And I was kind of just backstage and I'd help, it was a much cheaper affair, blowing up stuff and that. So we made all the explosions and I was always backstage. And eventually, I kind of looked forward to that week every year. And then I was backstage as a teenager and as an adult, and eventually was dragged kicking and screaming onto the stage. I really didn't want to go on. I just wanted to be in the chorus, to maybe, be there with a few girls, because I was painfully shy. And I got put in the role of Buttons in Cinderella, and I had exactly 1/3 of the script when you went back and counted the lines. So into the deep end, and I never come out of it since.
Okay, so how important is something that's come up in discussions with different people that we're talking to on the podcast about, I suppose, our norm. Our norm has changed so much. You mentioned that there was no panto this year. How important is something like theatre? Like when we look at theatre and we look right across the board, we look at Broadway, we look at the West End, they have all been shut. You see, Andrew Lloyd Webber has gone on there and he's been doing weekly things, playing the piano to his fans and stuff like that. How important is the likes, and not just on a local scale, but how important is it to have something like theatre as an outlet for things like mental health, things like how important is it?
I mean, it's a way of expression for people. It's a way for people to come out of their shells. It's a way to interact as, you know, something completely unrealistic, and to just let all of your emotions out on stage. It's a way to engage with public. It's there's a camaraderie when you're rehearsing all the way through it. There's a nervousness before you go on stage, and then there's that burst of energy you get from an audience when you're out in front of them. And for me, I've always viewed it as a way of it would charge my batteries for, you know, the over winter, and then that week of the show. Look, I'm on the bipolar spectrum. I have a condition called cyclothymia. And then recently I would have found out that I score very highly for attention deficit disorder. So that's why I was darting around like a squirrel for all those years and not able to concentrate. And, you know, I would have the ups and downs. And if the up that came along with the week of a show or the performance came along with an up in my my mental state at the time, there would be a huge crash. But I didn't mind it because that up filled my heart, my soul, everything with so much energy, and it got me through. And like it would get me through until, let's say, the middle of the year, the last week of April, first week of May, when I would go away for 2 weeks cycling with Cycle Against Suicide. And it was out telling people your story and opening up and filling your batteries again. And I always say to people, look at, you know, fill your batteries. And that's why I see, you know, this, people are, the first lockdown, they were very proactive. There was Zoom bingo and all sorts of things, and people were watching films. They were logging into Netflix via Zoom and watching them together and stuff, and all sorts of stuff. And then you know, we were in lockdown around Christmas, and you were all there in family and getting ready, and Santa Claus, and everyone was busy. But now, you know, we've come through the dark months, and it's only now as spring is starting to come, and the ground is heating up, and you know, little flowers are starting to appear. All the daffodils are coming late and stuff, that we are getting our own batteries to start to come alive again. And where we had that opportunity with the arts, it's been gone in this last lockdown, and people are finding it tough. I personally found it tough, you know, and there was, you know, I had dark days, and I get dark days anyway, but just because I would talk about them, I would find it easier. People would see, you know, hey, you're not around, you haven't been on Facebook. And I know social media can play into a negative side for people's mental health, but it has played an awful, it's played a huge role in our lives during lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's had negative and positive. And I feel that if you could just view the positives and find stuff like the arts and ways to keep busy, because people are missing it. They're missing expression. They're missing emotions. They're missing touch. And like,
Yeah.
when you're sitting in an audience, you can practically touch the performers, but that's gone for us now at the minute.
And where do you think this is going to go? I mean, you mentioned, like, you know, it's an outlet recharging batteries. Where is that particular outlet? You know, we all know where it is at the moment. What are your thoughts, Christy, on where it's going to go?
I'm an optimist, I suppose, and I would hope that vaccines would work, and that people would realize that vaccines are working since 1798 with Edward Jenner, and would take a vaccine. Now, I won't force it on them yet, but you know, I would hope that we can get a vaccine and life can get back to normal. But there is going to be some hesitancy, I see, from people in wanting to get close again. So if you can't get close, if you can't get into a stage, we're going to have to find ways of, you know, engaging with audiences in a manner that is less expensive, less intrusive. Like putting on a show in a theater is very expensive, and so you don't pay for it unless you got bums on seats. And when you have to leave big spaces between bums and you've only got a small theater, you're going to have to think outside the box. And so if we're going to have open air theatre, if we're going to have different types of performance, so I think creative people are going to have to get more creative.
Okay. Christy, you mentioned the cycle against suicide. A lot of people would know you. You mentioned again social media, and that's certainly where I see a lot of the work that you do. Tell me about that and the part that that particular cause, the cycle against suicide. Tell me how that pans out for you and where it sits in your
Okay,
life.
don't hold your breath. This could be a long sentence. I would have suffered from depression and maybe a bit on the bipolar spectrum from when I was 16. And I wouldn't go and do it because there was such a stigma around mental health. And eventually, I think I was maybe 19 or 20, and my mother begged me as a Christmas present to go and see the doctor. And so I sat down, and I can remember saying that I was the most reasoned young person she'd ever met when it came to speaking about mental health and stuff. And I'd explained how I could cope with the lows and I enjoyed the highs and stuff. And she wanted me to take lithium, and I refused. I said, look, I'm not taking medication. I'm happy the way I am, and I'm staying that way. And so I wanted to go, and she says, oh, no, you're not finished yet. You have to, I have to refer you to see a psychologist now. So I was sent to see a psychologist, and I can remember going in and just saying the bare essentials I needed to say to be diagnosed with stress. And I came out then into a waiting room that had been empty when I was going in, but was full. And there was a young girl my age, a very pretty blonde girl, sitting straight across from me in the room as I walked out the door. And it was a room, and it was all sort of large windows, low windowsills. And of course, all I could see was glass everywhere, and I had a panic attack. I couldn't get out, and I was pawing along the windows to get out and away because I was so ashamed of being in there in front of people and in front of, a peer of my own. So I buried it for years and would have used, out partying and alcohol and stuff too much. And then I kind of grew up and I got married. And, Claudia would have noticed that I was having ups and downs. And she said, look, you need to go and get help. And I kept putting it off. And then I started to go cycling with a few friends. And we happened to see an ad on the prison website about cycling and suicide. And we said, we'll go to that. You never know, we might even get a couple of days off to go. Better still, they might pay us to go if we were really lucky. None of that happened, but we went anyway. And I can remember the first day being there and talking to a guy who was an ex-Marine. And so he was in the football stadium, outside Mogadishu when around that film Black Hawk Down. So he'd seen real action. And I asked him, what's going on inside at dinner time? And he said, they're just talking about feelings and shite. I'm going for a pint. You coming? And I said, no, but I hung around just watching. And then that was on, let's say, a Tuesday. That Friday, we drove all the way down to Killarney to meet the cycle again. And Finbar O'Sullivan Finbar Walsh, sorry, not Finbar Sullivan's from Portish. Finbar Walsh, he was the father of David Walsh, who had, is that the name? I could be having a block. But the Live Life Foundation, this young man was dying of cancer and he wanted to stay alive. And he saw so many young people taking their lives. And I happened to go into the hall and I noticed this was an ordinary guy who was just telling his story to try and help other people. And then I met him out cycling later that morning and we knew a few people together. I had a great chat with him, cycled into Tralee with him. And so then there was another talk at dinner time and I was kind of listening and it was ordinary people telling their stories. And the next day we were cycling all the way up into Limerick and I heard a girl speak about having an inoperable brain tumor, but her and her husband weren't dwelling on the morbidity of it. They were focusing on creating good memories for her to take with her wherever she went and for him to always have. And they were just ordinary people telling their stories. And then the following day, we were all the way up to Tuam in Galway. And I'd heard other people on the bikes telling me their stories. And then I heard a guy, look him up actually, he does a TED Talk, Rob Carley. And he tells a story about how you're lovely, you're lovable, and you're loved. And how he'd lost his wife, his childhood sweetheart. But life had turned all the way around again and he remarried and, made something beautiful out of it in the end. I won't ruin the story. But I can remember going home in the van that evening with the other lads, prison officers, who never show weakness, never speak about, mental health or feelings or anything like that. It's the ultra macho environment. Um, and, I had already blurted out to one of them earlier that day that I suffered with depression. And he go, oh, what? And then I kind of closed the van and disappeared. But on the way home, I was just got into my head, I'm going to get help. And I can remember coming into the house here, going up the stairs to Claudia, and she was putting clothes away into the hot press. And, well, how'd you get on? She said. And I said, listen, I'm going to get help. And she's like, what? No, how'd you get on today? I said, no, I'm going to get help. And he's been at me for a couple of years, but I've decided now I'm going to go and get help. I've been suffering with depression and stuff. It's not fair on everybody else. I'm going for help. And it was just understanding that I wasn't the only one, that there was loads of other ordinary people out there who were going through the same stuff. And so since then, I course, I jumped in the deep end. Not long after it, they were going to be coming through Portlaoise the following year. And I got a job then all of a sudden as kind of looking after the Portlaoise end of it. And I stood up one night. There'd been a week-long novena. And Tuesday night was it was in memory of people, and it was my father's anniversary. So I was at Mass with my mother and everybody else. And then Wednesday night was, for the blessing of the sick. And of course, my mother was there, and I was to go down and get my head blessed. That had to be done. And Father Paddy was there, and I would have spoken to Paddy on many occasions and had a pint with him like we were friends. And Paddy would have known about my, suffers with depression and stuff. And he, I would have been chatting with him. And then he happened to say at Mass on Saturday night, I think it was, is for families who've been bereaved through suicide. And of course, I went home that evening and I just picked up the phone and said, listen, Paddy, can I say a few words at that Mass? And he said, yeah, fire away. I said, look, what have I got? He says, 3 or 4 minutes at the end of Mass after communion, I'll slot you in there. So I went along. It was midnight Mass. And I had a kind of a speech written out. I don't know where it came from, somewhere inside me, and I just went up. So Claudia was at home here with the kids. She couldn't go. So my mother was there beside me for support. And I stood up, and I can remember saying, hello. Well, the Monsignor introduced me. He said, look, you all know Christy from the Panto and Entertain Us, but here's going to speak about something that's a little closer to our subject this evening. And I stood up and said, hello, most of you know me, Christy Bannon, 40 whatever years old, born and raised in Portlaoise, married with 3 children, and I suffer from depression. And there was an audible gasp in the audience. And from that moment, since, my life has completely changed, because so many people come up to me. Like Mass ended around 1 a.m. Or a little before it. And it was, I think, 20 past 2 or 20 to 3 in the morning. And I was still in the chapel yard with people talking to me, hugging, crying, sharing their stories. And it's been constant since then. So I started writing a blog. I got more involved with Cycle Against Suicide. I became lead cycle marshal for the country. I would have gone around to schools and given talks and stuff. And I just find that letting people know they're not the only ones, it saved me. And it's allowed me to save a lot more people via phone calls and messages where they would reach out. And I think if somebody else can learn from that and share their message, that they can save other people too.
The question, I was just going to ask you there, Chrissy, what was the most important thing people need to know about mental health? And you kind of answered there, I think.
Yeah, for me, it's that, you're not on your own. You see, it's been normalized now that people don't talk about mental health because it's something you can't see, and if you can't see it, you can't quantify it. And I would
is that an Irish thing, Christy, or is it where is it a macho thing? Is it like, is there big? Where does that come from? Because we talk about everything else. We put our dinners on social media. We talk to our friends. What is the stigma? Like, what do you think is the stigma? Why can't we say and put our hands up and say, as a nation or as a person, I have, I'm feeling down, or I need a bit of help? Why can't we do that?
Look, there's a whole load of reasons all playing in over the century. Like up until I think it was in 1993, suicide was still a crime here. In the past, you wouldn't be buried on hallowed ground if you took your life. It was a sin. And it was people who needed your help and you were turning away at their time of need. Um, so it was like you could have had someone who was depressed or a bit manic, and all of a sudden they were a witch and they're being burned at a stake, in the Middle Ages. So all of that coming in. And then with the modern treatment of medicines, you can see something, you can scan it, you can get an image, you'll know what it is, you take this tablet, and then you're fine. But people had to think that, you couldn't take tablets for mental health. Oh no, stay away from them. And the people telling you to stay away could be the very same fella who, if they, had a hangover, banged their toe at the toilet, would be eating paracetamol like Smarties. And that kind of vexed me. And I can remember doing a course. I was doing a diploma course, which I'd never finished because I'd started getting treatment for the cyclothymia. And once that was all unmasked and I was getting help with depression, I found I couldn't concentrate. So I wasn't able to finish the assignments for the second GRI. So I have a certificate. I never finished my diploma, despite taking 2 years at it to try and go again. But anyway, on that course, we were doing a module on depression and common mental health disorders. And we were talking about treatment and stuff. And I can remember a couple of people nearly trying to speak up against medication for mental health. And so they were all talking about, and then I just had enough and they said, whoa, stop, look at, I'm on antidepressants. And they all were kind of shocked. And I said, look at, if you saw somebody who'd broken their leg and were walking around outside and their leg was flopping around underneath them as they tried to stand on it, you'd say, stop, what the hell are you doing? Get into the hospital, get that x-rayed, have it set, have a cast put on it, walk around with a support, take painkillers, anti-inflammatories, all sorts of stuff. And then not only that, when it's healed, then you're going to physiotherapy to build it up again. And just because you can't see the injury, people ignore it. No, it's not there. And that stigma, because of that, over the years, over the century, it takes generations to break down. And you were seen as weak or something if you spoke about it or were open about it, or if they thought, he suffers with his nerves, that sort of thing. And like I can remember a grandaunt of mine who had heard me speaking at Mass, and she said to me, I heard you with Father Paddy at the time chatting away, and do you suffer with your nerves? And I was going to correct her and explain everything that's going on, but instead I stopped and I said, yeah, I do. And that was her generation's way of, it was a catch-all phrase for it. But I think there's more understanding now. There's a lot more study and research gone into it. And slowly but surely, people are speaking out. And it's really because of social media and fame and, wanting to be like that pop star or whatever. Like we see with Brezzy. Brezzy opened up about his struggles, wrote a book, and now it's really 90% of what he does is, mental health advocacy.
But is there a flip side to that, Christy? And I suppose even thinking in terms of percentages, if we look at, we had for Caroline Flack, the situation, a lot of that was attributed. We've had the recent thing with the guy on the horse. Like, if you were to divide it, if you were to put a percentage on, how positive social media is versus how negative, would the needle point more towards negative in terms of mental health and people being isolated, or would it be more positive in your experience?
I mean, mental health is not mental health, social media is a more sort of a magnified version of society. And so the good stuff is really, really good, and the bad stuff is horrifically bad. And I can remember a girl in a school up, I think in Monaghan, one time. I'd given a talk to all the different classes over a day. And she came to me with a teacher and had a question and wanted to know, that she wanted to come out and tell her story. And, what should I do? And I had to say, listen, before you do that, make sure you're okay first. Because what can happen, and I've seen it with other people who've been, sort of youth ambassadors for this, and where they've been picked on and bullied in the school because they spoke out about these things. And despite everybody knowing how horrific it is, and parents knowing how vulnerable children are and stuff. And unfortunately, there are children who have absolutely zero oversight on them by parents when it comes to social media and stuff. And oh, my Johnny wouldn't do that. And then when you're able to show them exactly what they've been writing and stuff, and look, at it happens every so often where we see a child, a teenager, a young adult who are bullied because of what they've opened up about or what people find out about them, and instead they take their life. So like you have to try and mitigate the bad and promote the good. And I think education is a huge part. We have to keep educating. And like children are being taught this now in schools from a very early age. And older groups, retired groups and stuff, they're being taught all about this and, about the dangers of isolation and everything. And they're on it. But there's a generation that was like, pre-internet and has been raising kids and stuff, and they're ignoring it. They're not dealing with it.
Are they ignoring it, Christy, or are they not familiar with the potentials in case? Like, if you look at social media, because like our generation now are probably the last generation who grew into social media.
Yes.
The generation coming up now are growing up with devices. I mean, there's kids coming, out of hospital, out of being born with tablets in their hands, practically, to keep them quiet in the crib on the journey on the way home. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, my idea is, and it might be popular, but there is an abdication on your obligations as a parent by an awful lot of people. And it's like, here, you take that. And now these parents are suffering themselves as well in a lot of cases. There may be substance abuse, there may be socioeconomic problems. And as well as that, then you have people who are, having to pay for their lifestyle. The mortgage is very high. They're caught, negative equity, and they're work, and then they come home and they're just exhausted and can't cope. And the child is given a tablet, and and like where little Johnny is looking for attention, craving some attention and not getting it. So being a bully, he has attention and stuff, and it happens with girls as well. Like, I don't have to keep saying little Johnny. The little princess, they have very long pointy claws sometimes. And I think if like parents were, if there was some way of having an audit on what the kids were doing, and they were called in by a semi-state body or the schools and stuff, and say, okay, your child has these social media profiles, have you been checking them and have you been monitoring them? Because
do you think, Christy, that's a possibility? Sorry to cut across there, because if you look at the capabilities or incapabilities, as you see, I mean, we have TUSLA, we have the mother and baby home investigations, we have all these things that people are critical of. We should have had these checks in place. I mean, that's a huge, that's a whole other hour's conversation, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Conversation.
Like, do we have the adequate resources as it is now for supporting people with mental health questions? Do we have adequate supports that people can, who do get to the step and say, look, I have an issue, help? I mean, you hear the horror stories of someone.
No, answer, no, you don't.
Okay. And why is that? What
because it's been the poor relation of health services for generations right across the world. If you look at the per capita spend on, let's say, health in nations, and then you view the per capita spend of the health budget that goes on mental health, it's single figures. Now, the last time, like, one of the ways I explain to kids about how important mental health is I use a bicycle. And I would always say the back wheel of the bike is where you put in the power. And when you push down on that pedal, the chain pulls around, it pulls on the crank, it puts all that force going around out through the spokes and up onto the rim and drives you forward. And if you push too hard, sometimes you can break a spoke. And if that spoke breaks and the wheel, you stop. Now you'll stop, you get off the bike and you're going to have to get it fixed. But your mental health is the front wheel, and that steers where you're going. And you can get by with a broken spoke or two on a front wheel if you're not going too fast. The wheel will be buckled, you won't be very comfortable, it'll be a bit wobbly, but you'll get there. But if you push hard, if you're going hard down a hill or around a bend, and that wheel decides to collapse, the fallout is catastrophic. And you have to look at health as, physical and mental and emotional, and look at everything. It's not that you can just say, this is the health budget, right? No, it should be looked at in a holistic view. If people are happier, if people are more content in their lives, emotionally stronger, then they don't fall prey to a lot of other diseases that are preventable. They will have better lifestyles. You won't have so much problems with drink and stuff, stress causing heart attacks and all this sort of stuff. That a lot of that would be reduced if only people would say, okay, we're going to have to reevaluate how we spend our money on health.
So is part of that requiring Joe Soap on the street to say, put their hand up and say, and reveal, I have an issue? Like, is that important? Do we need to actually get and try to get a true figure?
I think, well, if you look at the Good Friday Agreement, everybody had to take a step together for that. The IRA had to decommission. The UDR and all this, they all had to decommission without knowing if the other ones had really done it. You had to take the word of General de Chastelan. Different political parties had to make that jump together. And if you waited for evidence and all to work one at a time, it would have never been done. So I think with fixing this, it would require a major rethink. It would require a huge overhaul of the entire health system and of the psyches of all the people involved. And you see, unfortunately, politics works on winning elections and being popular and saying the right stuff. And politicians make decisions only if it's going to, more often than not, only if it's going to benefit them and their party and staying in power. You're not going to get somebody who's going to say, okay, well, we're going to cut down the budget for this side of the health service and put more into here because in a generation's time, it's going to reap such rewards. But then you're going to have the people saying, well, I can't get my operation for this or whatever, and they will complain. So you need buy-in from everybody, and that's going to take a generation or two to change. And it comes in education and example. So more people, and let's be fair about this, you need brave people who are willing to stand up. I've lost an awful lot of friends, and I've been laughed at and abused because of speaking out. But I don't care, because it's all worthwhile if it saves just one person. And I can remember being in the doctors not long after I'd given that talk in the church, and I was having the nurse was taking bloods or something, and she says, "How are you?" And she says, "I'm grand, I'm grand." She said, "Look, you have to learn to go easy on yourself." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm grand, I'm not." She said, "No, you have to go easy on yourself. You're doing an awful lot, and you're helping a lot of people." And this was only in the weeks/early months after that. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She says, "You're giving a lot of yourself. You've been opening up and helping people and telling these things. And, that can be hard because you're dropping your own shield and you'll be hurt emotionally by it as well, by some people." And I said, "Look, it doesn't matter if it, look at it." I said, "If it helps just one person, then it's okay." And she said, "Well, look, I can tell you for a fact, I know of 2 people it has helped immensely." Said, "I was there with 2 of my friends, and they've both spoken to me countless times about how that one night has helped them since. So please go easy on yourself now for a bit, because you've helped some people." And so I've learned then over the years to step back a little bit. When I'm not 100% myself, you won't see me posting on Facebook. You won't see me putting out video blogs. But when I am, when my well is full, I can hand out water. But when it's not, I can't go to it.
I think that's something with the social media as well, is people have learned to program themselves that when they don't see someone every day on Facebook, they're like, what's wrong with you? But it's the wrong kind of question. It's the wrong kind of what's wrong with you. It's a superficial thing. Christy, we're coming up on time. One question I do want to ask you, and you mentioned at the start, is your battery's been charged. Okay, so what's charging? You're not on the stage at the moment. You're not, doing the thing you love, which is theater. You're not out. What's charging your batteries these days?
Well, I'm not on stage. I'm not out cycling against suicide. I'm not giving talks in schools. I'm not in work for like coming up on 3 years in June, really. And so what I have taken from this, for a year, or well, for well over a year, I was at home, but I was in pain and whatever else. And Claudia dragged me out of it and made me go on the school run in the morning and go for a walk. And then I would have to walk home so I would see people and get exercise and be outside. And then I would go to the school and pick up the kids and have them here. And for a while, I was just picking them up and dropping them to the childminder. And then when I was on reduced pay, we had to cut the childminder and I have them here. So I've taken time when I couldn't work and, couldn't do everything else. And even when I was sore, I still spend time with the kids. And it's a privilege for me that is denied of so many people, that I've been able to be at home and watch my kids grow and teach them stuff in school and show them things different than the teacher is showing them, that is years more advanced than they should know, and get in trouble. But, I've been able to spend all the time with them. And even during lockdown, when, other people were struggling for childminders and things, and how to work and everything else, Claudia was a frontline worker and had to go, but I was at home here and I got to look after the kids. I got to bring them out to play on the road and then bring them in to let someone else's family come out and play, let them play inside, go for walks, nature walks, show them how to, like, I had been trying to dig the garden. It was killing me. So I got a little tool and niddle. It was like a big rake. And I was able to just rake the top couple of inches of soil and plant peas and onions and stuff and show them how they were growing from seedlings all the way up, harvest them, eat them, explain where our food comes from, how we have to be more resourceful, less waste. And so I've tried to turn negatives into a positive.
Okay. And bring it back to basics and show them. Okay, Christy, give me some parting words, or give us some parting words. Okay, anyone listening in who may have thought, what, I'm feeling a bit bleh, I need to talk. Give us some advice to anyone who might be tuning in and listening to this conversation.
How long have I? I told you I could talk for
1.5 minutes.
Yeah, that won't be happening. Look, I have been through the darkest of dark days. I have been the guy who would get up out of the bed when my wife would be asleep and my kids were all asleep, and to go walking with a rope trying to find a tree to hang myself from. And because I wanted a sore neck and not a sore arse, it needed to be a big, strong tree. And so I'd gone through all that, and I see it now, and I'm on the far side, and I know that I have a 100% record of getting through the shit days. And so does everybody else who's listening. And if you can just realize that you are not the only one going through it. Currently, World Health Organization figures for a while back anyway, that every year, 1 in 4 people would go through a mental health issue. And over the course of your lifetime, that drops down to 1 in 2. So if half of the population haven't bothered at some stage, isn't normal, what is? And to know that you're not abnormal and you're not on your own, just because no one speaks about it, search out information. There is help there. Like even here in Portlaoise now at the minute, there's a push ongoing to get an office open for SOSAD, Save Our Sons and Daughters. They have a phone line up and running for people from Laois to ring at the minute. They have 3 counsellors put aside solely to talk to people in the Laois area who contact that number. We are looking to raise funds now to match funds that they have and open an office with counselling rooms, with services. Where I've been talking to politicians, county council members, and it's not just me. There's a lot of people working in the background. I was contacted by somebody else. But if anybody listening, and if you haven't listened yet and someone else is going to tell you, listen to what this fella says. I've been there. I've been through the mill. I've been so close on more occasions than I want to talk about to not having that tomorrow, to ending it all stupidly and, wasting what could be a beautiful life, spending it with people. And if they could just realize they are not on their own. So many people are going through the exact same thing. If you're in a room and there's 10 people there, there's 2 or 3 other people there have been going through that. In the UK and Ireland, 1 in 5 people will suffer from depression or anxiety every year. And it's not something that you should be ashamed of anymore because it's normal. And the only way to make it a normal that everyone speaks about is for you to, listen to other people talking about it. Let your batteries be filled up by them speaking about it. And if your battery gets charged, let you speak about it too. And that will just keep passing on. I used to use an analogy of a little pond or a little stream and a leaf stuck under a twig or a branch and can't get loose to flow down the river. And that if you drop a pebble in, the pebble ripples out and it would shake that leaf. So if every time somebody would drop a pebble and tell their story, it would keep rippling and shaking that leaf loose so that it can go on down. And so if you drop your pebbles, maybe someone else will get the strength to drop theirs too. If we all speak, tell our stories, the world will be a better place.
Excellent. Christy, you mentioned there someone, and I know there are people who's going to agree with me when I say you're lovely, you're lovable, and you're loved. Okay, and we'll drop in the you mentioned a couple of supports there. We'll drop those into the conversation afterwards. Christy Bannon, thank you so much for joining us today.
David, don't mind what to say about you. I think you're lovely. God bless. Bye bye.
And that's it for another week. Thanks for joining us this morning, and do join us next time on Be Your Best You. Have a good week.